presentation today is entitled How to Be Fluent in Spanish in 40 Minutes. It starts the minute this guy gets here, not yet, so we're going to time him. Most of us would like to be able to speak Spanish, but many consider it too daunting. Anybody like that? I'm one of those. I hate it. New research in second language learning has revealed something quite surprising. You can learn a language by using a language. Although this sounds a little paradoxical, using a language you don't know to learn the language, it works. See? And it's more fun than learning grammar rules. Rylett started teaching English as a second language after retiring as a systems analyst. He was also a nurse at one point. He discovered the traits of the successful language learner from observing his students. And he began to realize true communication does not come out of a book. Phil has lived in Ajijic for 4 years, and though he arrived with only rudimentary Spanish, he has trained youth soccer teams here and has participated in many other traditional village activities. So here he is, 40 minutes.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you, Don. Not many people know this, but when Don was younger, they laughed at him when he said he wanted to become a comedian. Well, no one's laughing now, Don. Buenos días. ¿Cómo están? This is going to be easier than I thought, isn't it? Yeah, over there. Okay. So it sounds like you're already fluent. Here you go. Gracias, adiós, por favor, buenos días, buenas noches, ¿cómo estás? No problem, right? Carretera, plaza, casita, malacón. These are native speaker level words. And still, no problem, right? And it really is going to be easier than I thought. So you can pick up your Spanish fluency certificates at the door on your way out. Okay. How many here have tried unsuccessfully or successfully to learn Spanish? How many consider that it was a success? Not too bad, not too bad. Well, every day you successfully navigate life in a Spanish-speaking country, and that should count for something, right? So what would constitute your definition of success? What do you say when someone says, do you speak Spanish? Nah, no, not really, just a little. Just exactly what is fluency? And what does it mean to say, I'm fluent? Or simply say, yes, I speak Spanish. If you say to someone, no hablo español, you're telling them you don't speak Spanish in Spanish. So when you get across that line of fluency? And language is very tricky. For example, the title of this presentation, How to be Fluent in Spanish in 40 Minutes. What does that mean? That I will teach you enough Spanish to be fluent in just 40 minutes? Or I will tell you how to become fluent in Spanish, and this will take me 40 minutes. I can hear the sighs of disappointment already. But how much instruction do you need, and what is the best approach? Today we'll look at an important distinction between second language learning and second language acquisition. Hopefully the following story will shed light on the difference. When Ben Franklin arrived in France as the US ambassador, he was a hit in political and social circles. He had learned French mainly from classic, the regular classes and from reading French literature. And he was amazed that in Paris no one spoke that particular dialect. So he decided he would have to learn this new type of French. So he just dove headlong into Parisian society. Now, one of his early French colleagues commented on Ben's command of the language. Dr. Franklin was reported to speak French very well, but he did not speak it grammatically And upon my asking him whether a phrase he had used was correct, he acknowledged to me that he was wholly inattentive to the grammar. 2 years later, John Adams arrived as Trade Commissioner for Paris. Adams was shocked by the manner in which Franklin was so much at ease in French politics at the time, which involved as much socializing as it did hard bargaining. There was a clear distinction between the two men's approach to the French language. The divide disguised a more essential truth. Adams was trying very hard, but it appeared that Franklin was not trying at all. Adams soon registered his disillusionment at the state of Franklin's French, which he had assumed was fluent. He was startled to note that his colleague's grammar was inexact. Even more surprised to hear Franklin confess when queried that he paid no attention to the stuff. Adams assumed that his diligent approach to learning French was superior to that of Franklin's, but colleagues who knew them both said that Adams and Franklin spoke French equally badly, just in different ways. However, Franklin achieved much as ambassador, had a great time in France. Adams, however, hated it and returned to the US having achieved very little. Franklin's approach was language acquisition, and Adams was language learning. Now, you're all fluent in English, yeah? Okay? To say that marriage is also a licit remedy of concupiscence, do you agree? A licit remedy of concupiscence. Anyone know what I just said? Anyone know what concupiscence is? Right me through. It's a real English word. Means a longing, sensual desire. And if you didn't know what it means, could you consider yourself fluent in English? You were at a party this weekend and someone says to you, you know, it has been said that the concupiscence of the eye outlives the desire. And you, now fully fluent and armed with your new English knowledge, nod knowingly and reply, oh, absolutely, absolutely. And now you know what concupiscence means. Are you going to use it? Perhaps if you're sexting an English college professor, it might come in handy. But it is unlikely that concupiscence is going to leave your lips anytime soon. It's just not in common usage. So how many English words do we use in a conversation? It's just a fraction of the English words that are in existence. And there are new ones arriving all the time. I used sexting, the word sexting, a moment ago. And I'm sure that some of you have heard this word and know what it means. The rest, by the way, are lying. Sexting is the act of interchanging raunchy text messages by phone or by computer. It first appears in 2004. It replaced the phrase, having a texting, which never took off. So although it appears for the first time in 2004, and every major newspaper has used the word as a matter of course since then, it didn't make it into a major dictionary until 2011. Now try and find that in a Spanish instruction textbook. We use 1,000 of the most common words to understand 85% of what is said to us. And if you bump that up to 3,000 words, only 3,000 words, you are 98% along the way to full comprehension. Ah, but if it were that simple. Words, unfortunately, can be slippery things. And do we use words as a fundamental way of knowing something? Or are they just labels that our brain attaches to our concept of things? In other words, if you cannot name something, does it exist as a thing, or is it just part of the background? Now, we have such an intimate relationship between things and their labels that it is hard to distinguish the two until you start learning a second language. And now you have two labels for essentially the same thing. Now, an Englishman, a Frenchman, and a Mexican were in a restaurant eating, and the Englishman turns to the Frenchman and says, what do you call this? And the Frenchman says, we call it a fourchette. Oh, fourchette. A few moments later he turns to the Mexican and says, and what do you call this? We call it a tenedor. They carry on eating, and the Mexican turns to the Englishman and says, well, what do you call it? He says, well, we don't have to call it anything, it's a fork. And that just may seem like English arrogance. But it does reveal our relationship with meaning. Can we natively understand our world in a second language, or will we always be doomed to translate? That is, read the original labels in our mind. Our native language is a system of rules and symbols. We actually mastered it long before we knew these rules and symbols existed. Long before we had to learn the rules in an English class in school. It wasn't enough that we could use the rules. We had to know about the rules. And now we know the rules. Perhaps they'll come in handy if we were learning a second language. Well, you already know about nouns and pronouns and adverbs and tenses and direct and indirect objects in your native language, so why not just substitute in the second language words by using them in their English role in a sentence? Why waste all that English grammar knowledge? It sounds reasonable until you realize that you don't actually consciously refer to any grammatical rules when speaking your native tongue. You open your mouth, the words just tumble out. And most of the time, without any conscious effort. And they conform very well to the rules of grammar, and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, no one seems to mind as long as you can be understood. The translation of meaning and concepts into language happens below our level of awareness. We have no access to this layer. You do not consciously pre-plan your English sentence before saying it. The formation of our sentences in our native tongue happens beneath our consciousness. This is very important when one considers using a second language. Do I know that I should use the subjunctive when musing what I would do if I were rich? Linguists have written chapters about the past English, the English subjunctive, none of which I know. But it doesn't stop me from using it. And I could easily say, if I was rich, and a few people might roll their eyes, and, yeah. But it is unlikely that anyone will correct me or misunderstand me. There are language purists who delight in telling us how we can't speak our native language correctly. Who versus that, me versus I, between versus among. We apparently should be ashamed of ourselves for our illiteracy. Knock knock. Knock knock. To whom you are in trouble. So why do we concentrate so much on grammar in the second language learning? Well, it's easier to teach. It's easy to assess progress. You don't have to worry about regional variations and idiosyncratic rules. You also don't need a native speaker to teach it. And it is easier to sell. Question is, does it work? Now, before you embark on any journey, and this includes second language learning, you should really know where you're going. What is your goal? Why do you want to learn Spanish? If you have to pass a test or an entrance exam or a competency exam for a job, etc., then learning about the grammar of a second language is a must. It's not can I sit here, it's may I sit here. Well, what if you just want to communicate with the local people in their native language? These are two separate goals, which should have two separate approaches. Now, these approaches cluster around two basic methods. Those which use translation and grammar explanations in the learner's native language as the touchstone for meaning in the new language, and those which do not. The former is called the grammar translation method. Warren Hardy is an example of this method. The second group is the direct or natural method, and language immersion belongs in this group. But this distinction between the two wasn't so clear 500 years ago in Western Europe, when Latin was still a living spoken language in the 17th century. With the decline of Latin as a spoken language, teaching by translation and rote memorization became the only way to read classic Latin writings. There was no colloquial Latin being spoken. Students were evaluated primarily with written tests, while oral abilities were used simply to read translations out loud. During the 18th century in Europe and later in North America, modern languages began to rival Latin in schools. The rote approach was simply recycled to teach modern foreign languages, and the grammar translation method emerged. Now, over the past century, linguists began to question the efficacy of this method. After centuries of dominance, grammar translation method had proven unfit for teaching students to communicate in a new language. Assigning text to translate and grammar rules to memorize had not worked. Using students' first language as the language of instruction had not developed the students' abilities to communicate in the second language. A new direct method started to take hold. This direct method stressed oral communication and learning to think in the new language. All foreign language instruction occurred in the target language. The language students were learning with no instruction or translation in the students' native languages, and yet today we still find that many courses and texts still rely on grammar translation, and therefore fail to build genuine communication skills. Now, the goal of the grammar translation method is to learn a language in order to read its literature and in order to be able to write professionally. Grammar is taught deductively by presentation and study of grammar rules, which are practiced through translation exercises. Instruction is given in the student's native language, and the focus is on reading and writing. Vocabulary selection is based solely on reading text used, on the reading text used, and accuracy is emphasized. Motivation is extrinsic. It's based on externally measured progress on knowledge about the language. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, as long as you understand what the final result will be. Instruction in the direct method, on the other hand, is in the target language only. Everyday vocabulary and sentences are taught. Grammar is taught inductively, without specific reference to any formal rules. There is a greater focus on oral communication, and vocabulary is taught through demonstration, objects, and pictures. Motivation is intrinsic and is maintained by recognizing an increasing ability to communicate. Now, although it appears that the two methods are just a question of learning strategy, the fundamental understanding of language is different between the two. One distinction between the two styles is very well known. One parameter, which is a natural feature of learning a language as a child, is not tolerated in the grammar translation method, and that is making mistakes. I've never seen a course that encourages or permits you to make a mistake, and errors are inevitable and should never impede attempts to communicate. Correcting errors may not be as beneficial as one thinks. So what should our approach be? Never correct errors? Assume we'll figure it out in the end? Well, there is a surprisingly consistent natural order of learning which we can't violate. For example, in English, students of English learn ing, talking, speaking, running, long before they learn the use of s in the third person singular. I talk, he talks, you speak, he speaks. The student of English will eventually internalize this rule when they are ready. And until then, they'll omit the s. And we shouldn't consider this defective. It is a stage. It is a natural process. If you want to correct this, it has been shown that a repetition of the correct form is sufficient. The rule never has to be mentioned. So, someone says, he speaks with an accent. You go, really? He speaks with an accent? Errors should be viewed as a natural part of the process, which will eventually self-correct, if we pay sufficient attention. Remember, if your goal is to be understood rather than be perfect, then errors are just like knots in the wood, little imperfections that add character. Now, it is easy to understand the theory behind the grammar translation method, but how do you acquire a second language? Stephen Krashen, professor of linguistics at UCLA, claims that the only way to acquire a second language is when we receive messages that we understand. We might not know how we understand, but we have grasped the gist. For example, when leaving a store, you will usually hear, "Que le vaya bien." Now, it's equivalent to "have a nice day." You do not have to know that the verb requires a subjunctive mood because it's a desire. You don't have to know that the pronoun is indirect. You can instantly understand the message without knowing why you understand it. Later, you'll appreciate how to customize it for the plural or informal, but for now, you just get it. Now, Krashen gave a talk on second language acquisition to second language teachers, and in it he demonstrated the importance of the exposure to messages that we can understand. Now, in his talk, he gave his lessons in German to demonstrate this. He chose German as he assumed no one would speak German. As I cannot pronounce German, I'm going to give Krashen's lesson in Spanish. Now, I'm sure that my Mexican friends here will probably tell you that I don't know how to pronounce Spanish either, but these lessons are for people who know little or no Spanish. So here are a few minutes of the talk. I'm going to change my glasses just to show that I'm now channeling Professor Krashen. So, I'm now Professor Krashen. If acquisition is it, the question that then becomes, how do we acquire? I will give you 2 quick Spanish lessons, and you can tell me which one of these lessons would help you to acquire Spanish. Now, this is aimed at the person who speaks know a little Spanish. The rest of you will have to remember what it was like. Lesson number 1. You ready?
Yeah.
Para el oyente, las superestructuras están vinculadas a otras unidades de representación esquemática de las acciones y interacciones sociales como los mapas o los guiones. Dan una base de conocimiento relativamente invariable en condiciones normales que facilita la realización de inferencias casuales hacia adelante y hacia atrás y durante la comprensión de textos orales y escritos. How did I do? What do you think? Good lesson?
No.
Do you think if I kept talking to you like that, you would be able to pick up Spanish? Very slowly, if at all. Here's lesson number 2. And you have to watch. Okay? Esta es mi mano. ¿Entienden? Bien. Esta es mi cabeza. Cabeza. ¿Entienden? ¿Cabeza? Bien. Estas son mis orejas. 1, 2, 2. 1, 2. 2 orejas. ¿Entienden? Ojos. 2 ojos. No, 3 ojos. 1 ojo, 2 ojos, 3 ojos. ¿Sí? ¿Es correcto? ¿Sí? 3 ojos, no. 2 ojos. 1, 2. Esta es mi boca. ¿Entienden? Boca. Labios. Labios. ¿Entienden? Mis labios necesitan lápiz labial. Lápiz labial. ¿Sí? ¿No? Los hombres no usan lápiz labial. Pero las mujeres usan lápiz labial. ¿Sí? A veces sí, a veces no. As a beginning Spanish speaker, if you understood lesson number 2, I did everything necessary to teach you Spanish. We acquire language in only one way, and this is the big moment. When we understand messages, that's it. We have tried everything else. We have tried teaching grammar. We have tried getting students to memorize vocabulary, dialogues, sit in front of machines. Next we will try electric shock. We have tried everything. But the only thing that works, the only thing that counts, is giving people messages that they can understand. What we now call comprehensible input. We acquire language when we understand what people say, not how it is said. Notice that when we teach a language today, we do the opposite. We give students a rule, and then we have them practice in production. And then we tell them whether they got it right or wrong. Going back to me. Now there's the practicality of this that is the real challenge. We can watch the nightly news in Spanish, but if you're at a basic level, it is not going to be comprehensible. You are never going to acquire Spanish listening to Spanish that you cannot understand. Fortunately, Dora la Exploradora and other kids' shows come to the rescue. Their Spanish starts at a very basic level, but unfortunately so does the plot. And we have to muster the enthusiasm to help Dora discover the magic unicorn over the Rainbow Bridge. Now we'll come back to acquisition strategies in a moment. But when we converse in English, we believe we are tapping into this warehouse of mental things conveniently labelled in English. So pervasive is this idea that our representation of reality is in our native tongue. We believe that we think in our native language. Now, as a monolingual English speaker, the only way to express our thoughts is in English. But have you ever thought of something? You know what it is, but the word eludes you. It's that, you know, it's that, it's, come on, you know what it, you know, it's a, you know, it's a, what's it called? It's on the tip of my tongue. Now when this happens, you know the word you're trying to say. You know the word that is eluding you. If someone were to say it, right, you go, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to say. But you could not be thinking in English, or else you would have known the word. If your understanding of what you wanted to say, your thought was in English, the word would be automatically known to you. You wouldn't have to struggle to find it. In fact, you could not know it, or else you wouldn't be able to think about it. Our understanding of reality is not in any particular language. And the link between our understanding and its expression in a language is just not available to our consciousness. And this is the error that's made in the grammar translation method. We are unaware of it. It all happens under the hood. With a second language, you have basically two choices. You can add a layer of translation, or you can forge a direct link between our concept of things and the second language. Now, the translation means that everything you say runs through a layer of translation. But when you forge a link directly between your idea of something, your concept, and the native language, no translation is necessary. And sometimes people describe this, oh, I'm now thinking in the language. It means they're bypassing that translation layer. Now, we have limited control over how we respond to language. Think of a green elephant with an orange trunk. Or even better, don't think of a green elephant with an orange trunk. Meaning exists without a conscious effort to invoke it. In the case of not thinking of the elephant, we can't even stop the words we hear from ending up as meaning something. When those labels are unknown, we do not lose the ability to think of something, we only lose the ability to express it. Now, one thing is crucial to understand. Forging a link between a word and its label is a conscious effort. If I say, oh, tenedor, when I read that rule, when I see the English word, fork next to tenedor, I am consciously registering this link between the two. Making the connection between a word directly and its meaning is subconscious, and that is difficult. During communication, meaning turns into words subconsciously. There's just no conscious effort, no pre-planning of the sentence, no monitoring of the output. This is what happens when you acquire a language. Learning a language does not make these connections. Learning a language is an artificial exercise. It cannot permit communication until the meaning has been acquired. Can you push the conscious rules into subconscious meaning? No. Linking meaning to language is something that is inaccessible to us. It happens subconsciously. You might get exposure to colloquial Spanish if you use your learned Spanish to interact with local Mexicans. However, this interaction has now moved from learning to acquiring, and you will now be forging these links subconsciously. So if we're not thinking in a language, why are there so many Spanish instruction products that use translation? Actually, they're a dying breed. FSI and Warren Hardy use the translation method, but the more modern products like Fluent, Rosetta Stone do not use your native language to teach your second language. This is the reason you couldn't do your kids' homework after 5th grade. But you remember to test the bathwater with your toe before stepping in. That's the difference between school and life. In school, you're taught a lesson and then given a test. In life, you're given a test that teaches you a lesson. The best way to improve your Spanish communication skills is to confront a situation that challenges you and where you have to use Spanish to resolve it. That is the test. You don't learn a language in order to use it. You use a language in order to learn it. This is what creates true meaning. Meaning that you can access without consciously thinking, just the way you do now. Speaking Spanish is not speaking English with Spanish words. It is a direct expression of your ideas in a second language. When you translate, you have to be able to consciously access grammar rules while you are formulating what you want to say. Now let me show you how difficult this is in English. I can't imagine how many rules you would have to consult in order to make sense of something, to grasp total meaning in Spanish. So let's look at what happens in English when we just have to change two rules. Now, in a popular British 60s game show called Take Your Pick, there was part of the show that pitted the game show host against the contestants in a game where all the contestant was to do was answer questions in a casual conversation. However, there was a catch. To win, the contestant had to engage the conversation for a minute without saying the words yes and no. English grammar had just changed its rules. Yes and no no longer had meaning, and you cannot use them. Simple, eh? Okay, let's see. Now, I need a volunteer. Where did the mic go? Did you steal the mic? Oh, thank you. Someone who doesn't know me. Volunteer. People looking down. We have one? He looks a little too smart to be my volunteer, but come on, I'll try. Your name, sir? Jason? Big hand to Jason. Oh, Jason, they're lovely. Okay, now, when you step on the stage, right, yes and no have no meaning. Is this on? Yeah? Hello? There you go. Yes and no have no meaning, okay? So you can answer my questions, but don't use yes and no. Okay? So, do you want to step in? Big hand to Jason, everybody. Yay. Jason, where are you from? Canada. Oh, congratulations. Was it 140, eh? 150? 150 years yesterday? No. You don't know? You Canadian? Yeah. That's excellent. Just lost. Thank you, Jason. Big round of applause for Jason. You know, the game show host Michael Miles was an expert at coaching yes and no other people. But it's not that hard. Don't feel bad, Jason. Don't feel bad. It's not that hard. It is difficult. It's difficult to think about. about what you want to say and referencing a rule at the same time. Even if, with this new rule that you just learned, it's almost impossible. And not only that, the rule covers grammar, and there's more to language than grammar. There are social and cultural variations that the rule cannot take into account. There's a real problem ensuring accuracy of meaning. It will always be filtered through English, and meaning might not quite overlap. As every professional translator will tell you, you translate for meaning. So if we want to use a second language to communicate, then we have to look for a method that embraces understanding of the rules. Direct meaning rather than translation. This is the difference between acquisition and learning. We have to absorb meaning by paying attention when we hear something in our second language. But if we're going to engage in a conversation or communication, we not only have to pay attention to what is said, but we also have to be brave and try and speak it. Unfortunately, we have a village here with lots of people who are willing to listen. Lots of Mexicans who would love that we try and speak Spanish to them. We are lucky that we are surrounded by Spanish all the time, all day. What, my shore cable doesn't speak Spanish? My gated community is full of fellow English speakers, even the guy at the gate. He speaks Spanish. They prefer I speak Spanish at tangos. My Spanish will slow them down. The Guadalajara reporter is in English. LCS, Open Circle, Lakeside Little Theatre, Naked Stage, all English. Even if I wanted to, how would I get the exposure? But all I can say is, it is possible to spend your time here in the comfort of an English-speaking bubble, and living in that bubble and going to Warren Hardy once a week will not get you very far. Here's the good news. Life outside the bubble is great. Your horizons will open, and you will make new friends. Navigating life in Mexico will get a little easier. You'll also get a sense of accomplishment. Now here are some practical tips. Listen to lots of Spanish in two ways. One, just listen to the radio or TV. Doesn't matter if you understand it or not. You get used to the rhythm and the sound. Next, listen to Spanish that you can understand, or ideally, just a little beyond what your understanding is. We want to stretch your comprehension. There are lots of resources, for example, online, podcasts, etc. News in slow Spanish is exactly what it is. It's the world news read slowly in simple Spanish. Read simple books in Spanish. Now there's adult reading material for Spanish learners. You can find them on Kindle, Amazon, just do a search. There's two series in particular. One, a series about a woman called Lola Largo. I'm not sure anyone's familiar with it. She's a Spanish detective in Madrid. And the second one is Pepa Villa, taxi driver in Barcelona who likes her booze and she likes her men. And one book in the series about a friend going into hospital for breast implants. And of course, chaos and hilarity ensue, all at a low intermediate Spanish level. Now don't run to your English-Spanish dictionary if you don't understand the word, as long as you understand the gist of what is being said. But if you do encounter a word over and over and it's impeding your understanding, by all means, look it up in a dictionary. Try and use a Spanish dictionary rather than a translation dictionary. Read the same passage of a book, one that you understand out loud, once a day until you can't stand it anymore. Read the lyrics in Spanish to a song that you know. Read out loud, let your subconscious hear, absorb and acquire it. Watch Spanish language movies. Dubbed movies are easier to understand than Spanish-produced movies. Choose Mexican movies because sometimes the accents from movies from Argentina and Spain are impenetrable. Try and remember the visual scene and associate with the Spanish with the imagery. Are you all familiar with Destinos? Yeah. Destinos, great online series. Just Google Destinos about a lawyer turned detective. And that takes you in 50-odd episodes from beginner to expert. It's free, it's a fantastic series. The producer of this series, Bill Van Patten, also made a full-length feature film specific for all language learners called Sol y Viento. It's about some greedy Yanks trying to steal the oil from beneath a traditional vineyard in Chile. Typical. Now you can spend your day narrating your life in Spanish, preferably do it out loud unless you're in a public place and use your inside your head voice. Get yourself a Mexican boyfriend or girlfriend. Married, you say? Well, we all have to make sacrifices. Get adopted by a Mexican family. Sponsor a kid for a school uniform and school supplies. Then get to know the family. Go to church and go to the Spanish services. God will forgive you if you're in the wrong denomination, and he will be overjoyed if you're an atheist. Sit near the speakers because the church acoustics are terrible. Get involved with local projects. Volunteer. Join in. Go to the local Sunday afternoon soccer games over in Revolucion. 10 pesos will buy you a nice seat on some soft concrete. Bring a cushion if it's not soft enough here. A great community atmosphere. Everyone will be willing to talk to you. Ask about sponsoring a kid for buying soccer shoes. Get to know the family. Eat at the street taco stands or in the tianguis. And look for ones with lots of people and high food turnover. Engage in a greeting or two. If the next day the food is making a quicker passage through your body than anticipated, look upon the trip to the pharmacy as a bonus opportunity to practice your Spanish. Go into any local store and inquire about the price of something. Always respond to greetings. Always smile. Don't understand a word that's said back to you? Practice just a few Spanish phrases. Let your conversation partner. If you're just learning Spanish and afraid you can't understand much. And smile. They will understand. It's been shown that a positive attitude toward the host culture is a great predictor of success in second language acquisition. And what about the Spanish that surrounds you in your house? Familiar how your phone works? Change the language to Spanish. Same goes for your TV remote. You're brave enough to do it with your computer too. Now, what about Spanish classes? Well, courses like Warren Hardy use the grammar translation method. More progressive courses and many online courses use the direct method. Know your goal and choose accordingly. No class is a substitute for genuine communication in an authentic setting. A setting where your primary goal is to achieve some task unrelated to language learning, and the only tool at your disposal is your current Spanish. Great excuse to go shopping. You're in the best classroom there is, with the best teachers there are. Now, you're feeling a bit cheated. He promised fluency, and I don't know any more Spanish than when I arrived. Well, I hope that I have shown you that fluency is not a line you cross, and you become a fluent speaker. In communication, the only criteria of success is understanding and being understood. The moment you more or less get what is being said to you, and that other moment when you realize that you have fluent communication, that's the time. And it slowly improves over time. That special moment when you feel confident in saying you speak Spanish does not really exist. I'll also conclude that the best methods might also be the most pleasant. And that, strange as it seems, language acquisition occurs when language is used for what it was designed for, communication. Thank you.
Say damn it. We have time for a couple questions, and you can use whatever language you like. There's one way back here. She was the first hand I saw.
Great talk. I have a question and a comment. I know Spanglish, and I go into the stores and I kind of prepare myself with the first question I need to ask. And then sometimes I'm completely lost after that. So they assume I speak Spanish, and they start rambling back at me, a million miles a minute, and I go, muy rapido, and I'm like, so then I'm back to English, so I resort to charades. So I suggest charades is a very good filler.
Absolutely.
So that's partly why I hold back, because if I say my minimal Spanish, they assume I know more. And same thing if I ask them, they say poco, and then I start talking and they get that glare.
Question?
So how do you, I guess you just say stop when you're...
Charades are great. We're talking about communication. So if you can do everything by miming, that's fine too, if you only know a couple of Spanish words. But relax. You know, we are greater judges of ourselves when we're trying to speak our second language than the person listening to us. If we relax, if you remember when people do have, you know, talking to us when English is their second language, you know, we understand. And most people will adjust accordingly. I can have great conversations with Mexicans, with Spanish. They'll turn to their friend and start talking to each other. I'm lost. You know, it's a process.
Thank you for your insights, Phil. They're very helpful. I've known Phil for a little less than a year, and my observation is that he expresses 3 qualities that really make him a good language
What's
learner.
the question?
This is important. Number 1, he has a great love for the people here, and he has a great love for the community. And when we're learning language, it's important to express that, whether it's love for beer or love for going down for a walk at the Malecon, but he does that. Another thing that he does, he has humility. And he has the desire to learn.
We would like to have a question from the audience, no more comments. We all know Phil is a wonderful man.
No, but these are important things for language learning. So anyway, I think humility, love for the people, and a deep desire to learn.
Thank you.
Love the people.
I've lived in Mexico for 18 years, and I speak Spanish pretty well. My wife, who bailed and has gone back to Canada, is an accountant, and she produced a verb chart like that when we first arrived. I just plowed right into it, which is how you learn the language. But there is a book I would recommend, and I don't know if you know it, Breaking Out a Beginner's Spanish. It's very good. It gets you going right away.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know if you agree with me, but that's a very good. It's not. He was a former New York Times reporter, married to a Mexicana in Mexico City. He gets right into it.
Yeah.
So my question is, do you recommend any particular books like that one or another one that will help you get in?
If you think they will help you, that's great. Just remember that when you're consciously looking at a language to learn it, you're not forging those subconscious links. You know, that's just
Final
I
question.
that book too. It's a good book.
How important would it be to learn the pronunciation of your vowels and stuff? You know, because I hear a lot of speakers, and they're doing their best to speak Spanish, but sometimes their pronunciation is so far off that nobody can understand them.
Well, you know, pronunciation is an interesting thing because, especially in Spanish, which is so prescribed, the pronunciation is so prescribed, that the expectation of the Spanish speaker listening to you is that you will adhere to that prescription, which is a little different from English, which is we're so lazy that we are more likely to accept problems with pronunciation. We will always have accents, no matter how, when we're learning at this age, no matter how advanced we get, we're always going to have an accent. But an accent's not a bad thing. An accent is an indication to the other person that, you know, it's not your first language. And most times, people will adjust. People will adjust to you because they hear the accent. Some don't. And some just will.
Thank you, Phil. Let's thank Phil. We do have a